Alrighty, get started here in just a moment. Gonna copy the into the Twitter feed and give everybody a heads up. Got a lot of stuff to cover, so we'll jump right into it in just a moment here. Good. All right. And there we go. So what do you guys think about the race so far here in Bristol? Had a little bit of everything here today, I'd have to say. Not going to have a shortage of things to talk about today, that's for sure. We're going to wait for a few more people to come in here as we get started. Well, I mean, it would have been interesting to see like an unusual winner to cap everything off. I know Kyle Busch win is not too different from what's been happening up to this point, but given the way that he was able to do it, I was reminded very much of what Kyle did last summer at Bristol when he had a wreck at the beginning of the race, very similar to this. If I remember correctly, it seemed like he had a lot more damage in that one and managed to, contend back for the lead. Unfortunately, got wrecked out again and didn't end up winning it. But good race for sure. Good race for sure. I would, a solid 8. I would say. I mean, a good, 8 or 9 right there. Quite honestly, I mean, everything. It seemed to have a little bit of everything except for even controversy there. Ultimately, at the end with the restart with Keselowski, and a little bit of a shake-up there at the front of the field. But it'll be interesting to see what the scenario is, and perhaps the story isn't over yet because we're all, of course, in here waiting for the disqualification results. Let me estimate here how much time we have on the clock. I didn't start it yet at the immediately after the race, but let me kind of ballpark it here. Let's see. Let's shave 10 minutes off it, and we'll start it that way. So I play NASCAR Fantasy, not anything official. I have do my own unofficial picks basically before qualifying, and I just kind of roll with that. I mean, it shouldn't come as much of a surprise. I'm terrible at doing any of the fantasy sports things, unless you want to do it in the reverse and try to do the back of the field that way. But maybe I'd have a little bit better of a chance. Although that's been pretty unpredictable too. I certainly didn't see what happened with Almirola being a factor today, but we'll certainly get into that as well. Let's see. All right, got that going here. We have approximately 10 minutes or so since the finish of the race, maybe a little bit more, but we're going to use that as kind of the guidepost here as we wait for the results here. But yeah, really interesting race here for sure. Kyle Busch, unofficially your winner, beating his brother Kurt at the end there after Kurt slapped the wall, staying out on old tires, recovering from some damage to the rear of the car. And, but then on the flip side, the unofficial last place finisher, as mentioned, the Shazam paint scheme for Aric Almirola in the number 10 car, and a interesting rules situation set up there with the last place finisher under the crash clock or the damaged car policy. We talked about this a little bit on Twitter earlier. The issue last summer at Watkins Glen, when we saw Joey Logano have a very similar situation to this. Logano getting damaged in turn 5, banging in the nose of the car. He pitted in one of the first pit stalls at the very entrance of Watkins Glen's pit road last summer. Had some repairs briefly, then pulled back into the garage to get some more repairs done, only to find out that under the policy, he couldn't continue in the race. A little bit of a different scenario here with Almirola. The contact between himself and William Byron put the car in the wall, came down what I believe was the front stretch pit road, stopped in his stall for a bit, at least according to Race View. I know that there's some inaccuracies in the graphics when they set it up, but it looked like he went in to the garage area at the entrance right past the exit of the front stretch pits. And I'd heard different things between. I got to re-listen to the broadcast there as to what Larry Mack's quote of the rule was. If it was that a driver that pulls into the garage area after they pull out of their pit stall, or if they pull into the garage after they exit pit road. I'm thinking it's the former because, again, that was what happened with Joey Logano last year. He didn't have to actually exit pit road to get into the garage area, and that ultimately eliminated him for the race that time. But yeah, different set of circumstances there. But unofficially, still showing Almirola in the last place finish position. It's, again, as I mentioned in the Twitter feed, an unusual last place run for the number 10. Looking at it, we haven't seen car number 10 finish last in a Cup race at Bristol since 1995, the very same night race that Dale Earnhardt and Terry Labonte tangled for the lead. Both of them, Labonte spinning across the line and winning the race. Ricky Rudd was the last place finisher in that back in the old Tide ride back in 1995. Had a crash at the beginning of the race and finished last in that event. The last time that number 10 finished last in the spring race goes back even further. You have to go back to 1990, the spring race at Bristol. That would be the photo finish between Davey Allison and Mark Martin. Derek Cope was your last place finisher in that, and a different orange and white number 10 car had an issue at the beginning of that race and finished last in that one. So you have to go back much further to see car number 10 finish last. Of course, this is all now unofficial as we're now waiting to see what happens with the situation. The incidents, like, I mean, I'm looking at your comment here, Kokostin, your question about, accidents, like what happened at the start of the race. If you mean about Almirola's accident, I'm not that crazy about it, because I think, there were situations where, a car gets a little bit of damage. I've already spoken a lot about the crash block in the past, and my opinion isn't too different on it now. I like the perseverance in stock car racing about being able to repair your car and get back out there and complete as many laps as you can to try to get up there, and being able to salvage a decent finish and actually having that be something you could actually accomplish that way. I think that's something that I think would be really cool to see. And unfortunately, with the current protocol, I mean, yeah, if you can't sit on pit road for a long time. In some tracks, it's actually really dangerous to do so. There's an element of danger in all of these, but I mean, at Bristol, at least you have an extra wall there to separate the track surface from it. At other speedways, that's not really, they don't have that. So there's an extra risk there for crews that are going to be working on pit road for a longer period of time. So they should have the opportunity, I would think, to work on the car behind the wall and at least try to get it back out there. It seems like between Logano's situation at Watkins Glen and Almirola's today at Bristol, it seems like it's a trap that even the teams kind of fall into a little bit. And it seemed like in both cases, I was just coming back from work when the beginning of the race happened. I didn't catch the entire radio communication there at the time the number 10 pulled in. I did hear one communication about a few laps into the race there from Almirola's crew, where they were saying that the car was pulled behind the wall, listed as a mechanical issue and not a crash. That they had gone down pit road to kind of inspect the car, and that when they went behind the wall, the issue was looking at the steering controls. And again, it listed at least as a mechanical issue. I didn't get the full context of the quote, but it sounded like that was something they were at least arguing with NASCAR officials, and apparently it didn't go anywhere because we didn't hear anything from it after that. And then shortly after that was when Larry Mack was quoting the rule about the current inspection protocol there. So Almirola ended up only completing 3 laps unofficially and being your last place finisher of the race, of course, seeing what happens there. Yeah, exactly. I mean, having a barrier between pit road and the track surface. I mean, it's interesting that still isn't. You raise a good point there, Visa Metal, that it isn't, a trend that's available at all tracks like we're talking about there. And I also think that if the crash clock is something that's created in order to promote driver safety, that we don't want drivers out there running around in cars that are beat up and running too slow, I don't see how it's any more safe for them to be forced to go out there and try to reach minimum speed in a car that they haven't had any chance to do any repairs on, or very few repairs on pit road, because they can't be on pit road for too long anyway. And then try to go back out there. And then also on top of that, they can't use body panels or anything like that. They just have to use tape. So they're basically sending the car out there. And I think an equally dangerous situation where they're not only trying to throw a lot of repairs at the car, but they're trying to do them in very short order with not all the tools that they need. I think, quite honestly, that's a contradiction between what the intent of the rule was, at least what they said, was preventing having wrecked cars out there. When you had wrecked cars out there pieced back together, at least they could take their time. Maybe they'd be 100 laps down, 150 laps down, but they would be back out there and they would be safe enough that nothing's going to fall off the car. So you at least have a crack at it there. It'll be nice to see that come back. I don't know if that's gonna change anything, but that's where we kind of are with that. But yeah, issues with Arc Almirola there at the start. The bottom 5 got filled up by a number of mechanical issues. There were several drivers that were going in and out of the garage area after Almirola. Certainly the issues with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. with the damage after he rear-ended Kyle Busch. The car picked up what was reported to be a bit of an overheating issue with the engine. There were communications between Stenhouse and the crew concerned about about melting down the engine there during the race, so they had him pit a couple times and also spent some extended stays behind the wall to try to fix that issue. Apparently, he ends up finishing 105 laps down in the 33rd position, rounding out the bottom 5 group there. Corey LaJoie also sustaining damage in one of those other incidents at the beginning of the race there, caving in the nose of his car, ended up finishing 34th. Timmy Hill, it sounded like there was a power issue with the number 66. He was reporting that there were issues, first of all, with the handling, that he couldn't get the power down. When he did, it just didn't seem like it was, or actually, no, the issue with the power issue, I correct myself, that was the issue with Greg Galding in the 51. They had issues with the power. With Timmy Hill, it was a handling issue. They said that they weren't getting it through the corners very well there. Looking over my notes here. But similar problems with Galding back in the 51 car, although he ran a few more laps than he did back in the last August when he was driving for Starcom Racing, got involved in an accident at the beginning that also collected Kyle Busch, if memory serves correctly. That was the one that set up that scenario in that one. So the bottom 5 ended up being signaled not only by the last place finish for Almirola from the accident there, but also the several mechanical issues along the way, it seemed like. And it wasn't really all small teams that were involved in this, by, of course, what happened with Stenhouse, even to a degree with Corey LaJoie with the Go Fast Racing team. I know they're not, they're not too removed from, some of the smaller operations of the sport as a single car operation, but they've been closing the gap in a while here. So we haven't seen them in the bottom 5 quite as often as we've seen some of these other teams here. On the flip side there, unfortunate that we didn't see some of these really good runs that were during the race quite finish as well as they could have been. Chris Buescher first comes to mind, being between the top 5 and top 10 for much of the race, ends up finishing unofficially in the 22nd position after a late issue of the late issue forced him to come down pit road, losing a couple laps. Terrible situation for him there. You've seen the interviews with Clint Boyer having a good run there, but denied a win at Bristol. Matt DiBenedetto, the other one that has to keep in mind, 12th unofficially at the finish. That last pit stop seemed to really put him behind the 8 ball there. They perhaps had to try something to get up there, but unfortunately didn't gain that many spots on the final run. And what had been a run about the 6th position there, where he was going to tie his great run with BK Racing back in 2016, ultimately finishes 12th. Still a great run for him and great run for that team, which had on Twitter just announced that this was also commemorating the anniversary of their first attempt at Texas years ago with David Starr driving the car. Amazing how far that team's gone. Certainly the technical alliance with Joe Gibbs Racing is helping that. But I mean, there's been a lot of steps between then and now, running all the different manufacturers and everything else there. So glad he can still get a good finish out of that. DiBenedetto is starting to be a really good, underdog pick here for Bristol. So good to see on that. Let's see. Yeah, so I mean the issue with Almirola again, and this brings up another issue on the problem with what happened on the 10 car. Is it was interesting to see that the Stewart-Haas team, at least the PR group there, put a comment on there that they were saying that there was an actual. Let me make sure I quote it correctly. I believe they said there was a suspension issue they couldn't get repaired in time, and that was really basically the reason that they couldn't get back out there. I mean, whether or not, I mean, definitely seemed like the crash clock was a big role in that. I mean, they were already working on the car, and it seemed like they were working on it while the officials were basically either waving them off or informing them that they were done for the day. Let's see, where was the quote? I want to get that correct. Yes, post from Stewart-Haas Racing during the race. Arc Almirola officially out of the Food City 500. Damage to steering's too severe to repair. So at least that's the story from the team there, that there was already damage that they immediately noticed was going to be too serious for them to fix. That seems a little unusual for a team that's that well funded and that early in the race. Yes, it was a hard hit, but I'm not sure if the steering is that fragile on these cars. If we've seen there are so many other drivers that were having similar problems throughout that race that were able to keep going. And actually in the Xfinity race yesterday as well, Harrison Burton comes to mind in the Saturday race that he was able to keep going after that. But that's at least the story here. So it looks like there's at least a split in trying to figure out what had happened. But it does seem to be the issue with the rule that has put him back there. Very similar again to what happened with Joey Logano. Hopefully we'll get some more information between now and when the article's finished so that I can put as much information in there to give as much context as possible. But yeah, I mean, it seemed like really a classic, Bristol race. I think it was a little distracting. I mean, again, I don't like throwing this up a lot, but I mean, the empty stands and everybody being clustered into the straightaway stands, that was a little distracting. I mean, it's unfortunate that this track being the hot ticket that it used to be and having a race as good as it is and then not seeing a whole lot of people out there. I'm reminded of that old NASCAR commercial that they used to run where I think it was Jimmy Johnson and Chad Knaus were celebrating, and they're spraying champagne and stuff, but there's like nobody around them, and it's like emphasizing like how important the fans are in the sport and everything. It kind of felt like that a little bit. Yeah, I mean, a really bizarre set of circumstances there. But and we'll cover the Xfinity race there too, Matt DiBenedetto fan. So I want to make sure. See, now I can't say it. I was getting a good run of trying to say Matt DiBenedetto without tripping over my tongue here. Although I thought it was humorous to hear Darrell Waltrip use Matty D as the nickname there. I don't know if he'd done that before. That's always been my go-to whenever I trip over that. But we'll talk about the Xfinity race as well for sure as we wait for the results from technical inspection. We are now about 25 minutes into the wait here for inspection results. But again, Kyle Busch unofficially your winner, and unofficially your last place finisher, Arc Almirola, the number 10 Ford, sponsored by both the Shazam movie and Smithfield Bacon. Fascinating pairing of sponsorship, but we'll see. And yes, the unofficial results just refreshed. It does show Almirola out by accident, so it does not show it as the steering or suspension issue that the Stewart-Haas team was citing earlier in their tweet. So it is listed as an accident. So that, again, points to the crash clock issue. Looking further back, let me see if there's any other runs I want to kind of cover here. Oh, Ty Dillon. Have to talk about Ty Dillon. What about that run that he had in the stage one there, edging Clint Boyer and absolutely fighting for that position there? Ty seems like it's when I was watching that, I was kind of thinking back to the strong run he had at Dover. I believe was it last year in the spring race. He was right up there. Looked like he was going to pull an upset win there. Ended up getting collected in accidents and falling further back. A great run for him. Perhaps the concrete tracks are more suitable to his driving style. I'm not sure if that's from his background in ARCA or something like that. But good to see. Good to see both him and that Germain Racing team get some more attention. So 15th place finish for him on top of that. I believe that's a season best for him, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong about that because I don't remember where he ran in the 500. Let me take a look here as we get the results pulled up from the number 13 team. Okay, yeah, no, that would not be his best finish. Yeah, Daytona, he was 6th in that one. And then actually, yeah, he's actually had a number of good runs here. 13th at Martinsville, 15th at Phoenix. So the 13 teams actually picked it up this year. Got to definitely make sure to give a shout out to Ty Dillon and the number 13 team, picking up Dillon's first stage victory in stage one and covering that there. Looking around here, Ryan Newman, a great run for him, despite the bit of controversy that he was tangling with some of the other competitors there at the end of the race and damaging his car as well as Chase Elliott's car towards the end of the race. Ryan Newman in the 9th position. Good run for him, the number 6. Remember as well, the number 6 team had a good run here with Trevor Bayne a couple of years ago before one of his last great runs in that car before he lost the ride to Newman, and ultimately with Matt Kenseth as well earlier. But a good run for them, 9th place for the number 6 team. Suarez continuing to capitalize on his early season success, running in the 8th position. Came back from a number of issues like a lot of the drivers did in this race. Good to see Paul Menard in the 6th spot. He was actually, he was involved in that bit of a tire gamble with Ty Dillon in stage 1. Managed to still finish in the 6th position at the end of the race. I didn't really follow him that much at the end there, but good to see him have a nice quiet run there for the number 21. And seeing what happens there. Shame for Ryan Preece getting collected in the Kyle Busch accident. Seemed like that really did a number on his car, despite it looking at first like it was just some cosmetic damage to the car. Really did some damage there to the 47. He ended up being 25th at the finish, 1 spot behind Eric Jones, who also had a great run at the start and was also felled by issues with tires. And it ended up being a war of attrition very much. If you want to watch a race that's very similar to this, and a lot of you I know are hardcore, old school fans out there. The 1994 Food City 500, where you had Chuck Bound winning the pole for Bobby Allison. I believe it was one of Dave Marcus's last top 10s, and several cars running multiple laps down. Really unusual kind of a race, but a very interesting one to see. If it kind of reminds you of this one a little bit from here. Looking at the 66 Sam Bass tribute scheme for next week, I'm gonna be very excited to see what that looks like on the track. I know it's a bit garish and it's got a whole lot going on there, but we've seen this a lot with a lot of these like montage paint schemes and stuff and doing an arrangement on there. I think it's a really cool tribute to Sam Bass and doing, and I think the best tribute that you could possibly do for Mr. Bass is to just show his artwork as best as possible. And just and as I mentioned this on social media the other day, the sheer quantity of it, the sheer quality of it and the quantity of it, that there's just so much of it. And I noticed, one thing I thought was interesting looking closer at that paint scheme is that a lot of the pictures that are being used are ones from old Richmond programs or graphics that were done at Richmond. So like the Bobby Allison and Bobby Hillen thing from one of the first paint schemes that he designed, if not the first, from the late 80s. The old Pontiac Excitement 400 program covers. I always loved those because the Pontiacs were always my favorite as a kid. I just thought they looked really sleek and cool. And the program cover design, I believe the one from 91 was my old computer wallpaper in college. So I'm going to look closer to see if that one's on there. I know the one from 93 is on there because I saw the Rick Wilson paint scheme on there. I thought that was really cool. So, yeah, I'll be interested to see what it looks like on the track. I mean, hopefully it translates well, and we'll see what kind of run Joey Gase can get there as he gets back in the 66. It was, we're going to talk about the Motorsports Business Management team too, because they featured very prominently in the Saturday race, and we're going to use that as kind of a transition to jump into that as we continue to wait on the results here. Let me pull this up. And we got a lot of stuff to cover here. Let's see. Yeah, the rough deal for Buescher there at the end of the race. Just checking the other tweets that are coming up there. Matt DiBenedetto disappointed with the 12th place finish. I mean, you can't blame him there after having a good run, getting very close to a career best finish. But, looks like Matty D is really closing the gap here, so maybe we'll see at Richmond and going forward from there what that team can capitalize on. Let's see. All right. And okay, yeah, no word yet, of course, on the inspection results. Just pulling up the account here. We'll get into the Xfinity race here now and kind of cover that. The Allsco 300 yesterday. At Bristol, Christopher Bell winning in another similar come from behind situation, having getting knocked out of the groove and almost running into the wall at the beginning of the race there, coming back and winning the event after starting 8th, leading 57 laps. Tyler Reddick almost got the win there in the Dollywood car. That would have been really cool. Having been to Dollywood myself there, and it's definitely, again, I mentioned this on social media. Any of you guys make a trip out to Bristol, make sure you stop by Pigeon Forge and check it out, and give yourself a whole day to do it if you can, because there's a lot to see. It's actually a pretty big place there to check out. That car getting second in the race there. Your last place finisher in that event, John Jackson, driving for the Motorsports Business Management Team with Carl Long. They ran a tribute scheme to a gentleman named Richie Anderson, who I believe is a former racer, and I'm not sure if he had. It looked like he had some kind of role with the Motorsports Business Management Team. I don't really know a whole lot of information on that because the team has blocked me on Twitter, so I don't know what's going on with that. I checked their Facebook page. I couldn't really get a lot of information. I have some information on the gentleman there, but it was a really nice tribute because they have a nice big hood decal on the cars. And one of them did ultimately finish last with John Jackson there, the 13 car, being flagged for not going fast enough at the beginning, then having a couple pit road penalties when he came down pit road, ultimately listed out with suspension issues on the number 13, trailing in that event. But outside of that, and we'll get back to the rest of the bottom five here in a moment, the rest of the Motorsports Business Management teams actually did very good, especially Timmy Hill. You have to talk about him doing double duty. It was originally going to be Joey Gase doing double duty. Hill got switched into 66 on the Cup Series side, but was already slated to run the golden white car, the former Benny Parsons throwback, the old Toyota Camry. In the Saturday race, he ran on the lead lap for much of the event. He did lose a lap until I believe about lap 35 in the event. Before he actually fell down, and then he ended up 6 laps down to finish, but still 17th at the finish, staying in the top 20 really for pretty much all of the event. So a fantastic run for him. Good to see on that. Chad Fincham also breaking into the top 20. He slowed down suddenly at the end of the race. Lost a bit of ground there. I'm not sure if he lost any positions because he was also multiple laps down. That was the other thing that came to define that race, with only 11 cars on the lead lap at the finish. You had, but yeah, Chad Fincham is joining the team there in the top 10 with the number 66 car. Oh, excuse me. But also, good to see Greg Alding's streak continue in the number 08. I know we mentioned that he struggled in the 51 car on Sunday today. However, in the Xfinity race, the SS Greenlight Racing team again rattling off these top 20 finishes, a 15th place run for them. Unfortunately, we saw Brandon Brown's team not quite keep their own streak going. They ended up finishing 23rd of the race, although they had a little bit of damage on the right front, which perhaps played a role in that. That's actually their worst finish of the year. But prior to that, their worst finish was the 18th place run at Daytona, and they'd come into the event finishing 15th in 2 of the last 3 races. So, still a great start to the season for them, completing the majority of the laps and not finishing worse than 23rd in any one event in the first 7 rounds. So we'll see what happens going at Richmond and going forward. I believe Richmond is usually where Brandon usually runs the paint scheme for the Coastal Carolina University on the car. I don't know if that's going to be the case on the 86, because he usually did that with the Mario Gosselin's team. But we're going to see what happens there. Maybe we'll see some logos on the car. I don't have any information on sponsorship for them. They're certainly looking for sponsors from what I'm seeing. And also on that note, mentioning Greg Alding there in the same token there, the sponsorship with Panini Trading Cards on there. I know that he had a trading card contest on his social media there, so it looks like he's getting the brand a lot of exposure there. So good run for him. Ryan Sieg in a 12th place finish. That's actually starting to feel like a little bit behind of what that team is capable of. The RSS Racing team, having some issues there with everyone else. Josh Balicki's car basically is start and park. Only completed 3 more laps than Jackson to finish next to last in the race. Jeff Green tore up the right side of the car, had a fitting come loose on the radiator, got water under the tires, collected Ross Chastain, which was unfortunate because Chastain had qualified 12th in the number 4 car for JD Motorsports. Ends up getting eliminated from the race. He ends up in the bottom 5, and also joining the group in the bottom 5, Morgan Shepherd. Did start the race, the 33rd position, water pump issues for him, and finishing in the 35th spot. Alex Labay had the last place spot for a lot of that race. He came behind the wall for another mechanical issue around the same time that John Jackson was having his issues earlier in the event. He ended up coming back out multiple laps down and ultimately finished 31st with rear gear issues taking him out of the race. I'm not sure if the rear gear issue was originally why he went behind the wall. It seems to be that that's the case. I haven't seen a lot of information as to what was going on with the 90 team, but we'll look at the team's social media and get a little bit more information on that. Bad luck for Justin Allgaier. He gets wrecked out after leading 138 laps in that event, finishes in the 30th position, just outside the group that we talk about here. Tommy Joe Martins comes home with a 26th place finish. Kyle Weatherman had some issues there, finishing back in the 28th position in what was his first Xfinity Series start. Josh Williams was able to keep his momentum going from earlier this year. He had his career best finish last week in Texas. This week around, he comes out and he gets a 19th place finish in the Pig Leg Porker Machine. Interesting sponsorship on there. If you've read the article we did on the throwback deal there, or the article in there, that's going to be an interesting set of circumstances. Oh, and yes, and thank you for pointing that out, Matt DiBenedetto fan. Yes, I have to make a correction. Absolutely. Yes, Brandon Brown's not going to be in the 86 that next week. I completely forgot about that. Thank you for the heads up. That was an interesting. I think was it Mason Diaz going to run that one? I got to look it up. I know they had a different paint scheme with a different sponsor. So we'll see. That's right. Because I didn't hear back when I was posting about that, asking if they're going to run a second car. I know for a smaller team, that's probably not a possibility. Let me get that pulled up here. We'll make sure we get that on record here. Let's see. Number 86, looking at the Bristol entries here. There it is. Yes, Mason Diaz is going to be running the number 86 car in the Xfinity Series next week. He's going to run that event. And we got the information. Yes, that was announced back at the end of March. So we'll go ahead and copy that in there, and you can see that tweet in there as well. But yes, no, thanks for the heads up, Matt DiBenedetto fan. See, this is something I want to talk about in here too, because of course the elephant in the room is the big thing we got to talk about is Darrell Waltrip's announcement this week and retiring from the booth. So we're going to definitely talk about that and about getting the role of media and trying to get information right and trying to get everything out there correctly. So let me see. I'm just covering over here. Let's see. Looking back at the let's take a look at the rest of the Xfinity Series finishing order here. We had Brandon Brown with a 23rd place position there. Perhaps with him, if he's not running Richmond, I mean, we'll see what the entry list comes up. If he ends up landing with another ride to keep up there the driver points, that would be good to see. But that's going to be up in the air, I'm sure. Let's see, Alex LeBay, Josh Williams, Brandon Jones, Jeremy Clements with a good run. Spinning out towards the end of the race there, he had a very close call. I believe one of many that Christopher Bell was involved in. 51 spinning out, 20 just squeezing by in the high lane there. Clements recovers and finishes in the 13th position on that one. So good run for the underdog in the sport there. Let's see, where does that rank with his finishes this year? That would tie his season best finish at Phoenix, 13th earlier this year. He also finished 14th at Fontana and 15th at Las Vegas. So churning out the top 15 runs. His only runs outside of the 18th position this year were a 26th place finish last week in Texas. And then when he had engine issues at Daytona that ended up leaving him 36th out of 38 cars there. So different set of circumstances for that. Let's see. We're going to go down here. It's about it for that. David Starr, running a backup car for the Jimmy Means Racing team, had an incident in practice. Something broke behind the right front corner of the number 52 car. They had to go to a backup. They ran a Whataburger paint scheme where they were going to run a Chasco sponsored machine instead. So they ran the same orange car that you've seen in most of their starts more recently. And that ended up being their paint scheme for the main event. Let's look. So, okay, nothing new on this. Yeah, Daniel Hemrick had a rough run there in the Cup race too, finishing in the 30th position there. Let's see. Yeah, those are the big ones. Ray Black Jr. in the 16th spot. Again, running in recent races, it seems like they're finding a way to have both those SS Greenlight cars running at the same rate. So that's certainly good to see. We're about 42 minutes in now into the wait for inspection results, so we're still a ways off. This would be a good time to transition into our next topic here. Let's see. Okay, let's hit some preliminary stuff here as we build up to this. First of all, the Xfinity and the Truck Series schedules were announced last week, so very excited about that. The Truck Series returning to Richmond, and the Xfinity Series returning to Martinsville. So very interesting elements on that. If you watch some old truck races at Richmond, they always seem to put on a fantastic show there. I don't know why exactly they left the track there. I know there's sanctioning agreements and stuff that are difficult, but if they're putting on a show like some of the old ones you see between Terry Labonte's race with Jeff Bodine years ago or something more recently after that. But hey, better late than never, so we'll see what happens there. Martinsville for the Xfinity Series. It almost would have been cool if that was a series finale or a season finale, like it had been for the Xfinity Series way back when from its Budweiser late model roots, having that be the championship race. But of course, with the Phoenix now being the ISM Raceway being the championship round, that's not going to be the case. But still good to see them on the schedule there and everything. I believe it was also announced through this that we learned a little bit more about the Pocono doubleheader and having both the Truck Series and the Xfinity Series as part of that weekend and pairing them up on each of those days. That's going to be an interesting one to see there. I'm going to have to really look into. That's what I'm actually starting to kind of consider about covering for next season. We're going to have to figure that out. That's a track that I haven't covered yet anyway. But for all that I've made fun of it, the terrible broadcast, I'm not above admitting I'm wrong about something like that. So maybe that'll be something to check out. Let's see. Final race will rotate every year. Well, that would be interesting to see. I don't know. Yeah, the suspension of Austin Wayne Self. Good mention, Tad. Yeah, that's. It did seem a little strange when you suddenly had Bubba Wallace in the truck there, and they just did this swap where it seemed like it was this family-operated team. I mean, the Tim Self-operated team. Austin Wayne has been running it for as long as he has, and then switching between some of these other efforts with Al Neese and so forth. But it's unfortunate that the deal there with all that. But certainly hope that he's able to be reevaluated and return to the series as soon as he can, especially as a family-operated team. I don't want there to be anything. You certainly don't want the worst for anybody there. So I don't know exactly how long that's going to be. I mean, I don't know the exact steps about the road to recovery and NASCAR's current protocol with that. We've seen other drivers come through that and return back into the circuit. AJ Allmendinger is one that comes to mind, other competitors of that nature there too. So we'll see what happens with Austin Wayne Self, but certainly wish the best of luck to him there on that program. Let's see. Also looking at, let's take a look. 2 to 3 months, yeah. I mean, there's certainly some pitfalls there in the protocol, but I'm sure that they're going to be very much aware of that now that we've seen some other cases with other drivers having to contend with that. Let's take a look here. Let me get my other notes here because I want to make sure I hit all these points. Again, big thank you to NASCAR Man for having me on to narrate his latest video. If you haven't seen it, it's the video that the most dangerous race about the USAC event that very briefly existed at the Daytona International Speedway in 1959, same year that they did the first NASCAR races out there. There was an attempt, at least, to run not only open wheel cars, but even open wheel dirt cars on Daytona, and just the hazards and the very serious toll that that event took, as well as the exhibition runs that were held before that. If you haven't checked it out, I definitely recommend checking it out over at NASCAR Man History on YouTube. It'll be the first video on his channel there. Definitely give that a watch. What we also produced this week was the next episode of the Terrible Broadcast was put up this week. We had it on the Patreon last week. This was on the 1979 Daytona 500. Had a little fun with that. again, I'm not sure how much further they're going to go with this program. It was really difficult in that one because unfortunately, when I posted on YouTube, the video got taken down on copyright grounds, which is unfortunate because obviously I don't own the video footage, but this had actually been taken from some other fan that also had posted it on YouTube. So and they put the whole race, whereas I was taking about 11 minutes of clips from it and removing all the audio. So it seems like most of those, I believed in starting this program that a lot of these copyright claims usually come into play when it's about audio, about music, because there's a lot of different layers to that. But we worked around it there. We got it posted on dailymotion.com. The link is in the YouTube video link. The YouTube version is just the audio only because it's all I can get up there with the copyright on there. But you can see it with the appropriate video clips in there on the Daily Motion website. You check out my channel. Just type in Brock Beard of the YouTube channel, so you can see that as well as NASCAR Man's video. And hopefully, more videos. I'm certainly looking at doing some other ones there for mine. Again, I'm not sure if it's going to be a full-on series, but maybe just doing it here and there is just kind of a fun thing and seeing what happens on that. As for NASCAR Man's videos, without giving too much away, I have been offered the opportunity to do additional videos at NASCAR Man's channel, which I greatly appreciate. I mean, they're really fun to narrate. I have a great time actually helping him out with his work. I in this role, I'm actually doing kind of the easy part because he does all the work with like the editing and writing the script and all that other stuff there. He does a great job with that. I've enjoyed his articles on racingreference.info and glad to see him take his work to the next level. It's an honor to be a part of that, to kind of help him out there. So definitely help him out as well. Check out his channel there. And NASCAR Man History, that's the first one to check out. And then the Terrible Broadcast on my channel under Brock Beard. So let's see. Okay, we talked about those. I'm going to cover that. Let's go ahead and talk about Mr. Waltrip and his very exciting week that he had since it was first announced that Darrell Waltrip was originally thinking about retiring from the booth. And then suddenly the news then turned a little bit, and we found out that Darrell Waltrip was in fact going to retire at the end of this season, which is going to actually be the race at Sonoma, which we are planning on covering this year. And hopefully we'll get some interesting stories and background on what's going on with that. They usually do have a media day that accompanies that weekend. I don't know if he's going to be there for that, but I would anticipate that would probably be a big part of that. I'm sure the track is right now figuring out how they're going to handle that story there and everything. But they always do a great job with things like that. That's the track, of course, where they had the rocking chairs for Mark Martin and Rusty Wallace out there back in 2005, back when we thought Mark was retiring that year, and we knew that Rusty was. So it'll be interesting to see. But let's talk about the chronology of the events here. So yeah, Darrell Waltrip was originally announcing that he was thinking about retiring, and then soon after that, an article was posted at the Associated Press by Jenna Fryer that was talking about that really it's time for a change. It's time for a change at Fox. It's time to have Darrell Waltrip just kind of go off into the sunset. This was construed as a hit piece against Darrell Waltrip, and there's been a lot of very good. I mean, good isn't the best word. There's been a lot of debate about this on both sides of it since then as to the quality of journalism, as to what your role is when you're writing articles. There's everything like that. But there was, on the one side, you had several people that were saying, well, look, how could somebody write this about Darrell Waltrip? It's being mean about him. He's given so much for the sport, and he has, and we're not saying that he hasn't. And then there's the other side of it where you look back and you hear from several people that have just been tired of the broadcast, or tired of just the same routine in the broadcast. And I'm certainly no exception. I've been doing that too. That's definitely my where I've been on this angle of it. So when I first read the Fryer article, I really felt that, look, and I think I tweeted this actually the other day, that there are some times where you can't say an important story, without hurting somebody's feelings. Sometimes you always want to do it in such a way that it's not personal, that's not aggressive, that it's not disrespectful in any way. But there are sometimes where you can't really do that, and that's the unfortunate reality with the Darrell Waltrip situation. Um, Three-time champion, all more than 80 wins in the Cup Series, a Daytona 500 winner, and that's just what he did as driver. And then getting into the broadcast booth at Fox, although then this was clarified on Twitter because I completely forgotten about this, but he'd actually been a broadcaster for even more years before that, helping out the Nashville network and being a commentator even before then. So he didn't come out of nowhere in 2001. So I have to correct myself on that. Good to see. These are the hallmarks of several drivers, that have jumped into the booth. You think about Buddy Baker, you think about Ned Jarrett, you think about Neil Bonnet, you think about several of these other people. But it's unfortunate because you have a situation here where he's been in the booth for a very long time, and there's the sport has changed a tremendous amount, and you really you start looking at all the things that have changed and the things that haven't. And I know I've always gravitated back to the broadcast themselves, that they've always stuck more or less with the same formula they've always had, especially at Fox. There's been very little. You bring Jeff Gordon in there, and it seems like whatever at NBC they're trying to throw all kinds of stuff at against the wall and see what works and what doesn't work. At Fox, there seems to be very little of that, and that's kind of been the tricky part. But it's it's an unfortunate situation, because when you think about some of those other broadcasters, those drivers turned broadcasters, we didn't really see a situation where they were in there too long. Benny Parsons, of course, his tragic passing in 2007, he was working with NBC all the way up to the end of 2006. And then you think about Buddy Baker and Ken Squire and stuff like that. They were broadcasting all the way through 2000 before the Fox deal came in, and you had Waltrip and the crew there taking over. Very much the same thing with Ned Jarrett with ESPN with Bob Jenkins as well. Of course, Jenkins went on to do more broadcasting for IndyCar, and Ned Jarrett has done his infrequent ones with the Darlington race. But by and large, you had those situations. Then, of course, what happened with Neil Bonnet, and this is the interesting thing, this is the thing I felt was at first blush was kind of the most irritating thing about it, was this initial outrage, just how many people were immediately jumping on Jenna Fryer about writing this article, as if nobody has ever thought about Darrell Waltrip, just being in there and doing the exact same thing, and as if everything is just fine with the broadcasts, and as if it's the same formula that's always worked, and everything like that. And to some degree, that's true, but it's not. You can't just pretend that nobody's had any concerns about these broadcasts, and you haven't had a very vocal, if a minority, is certainly a very vocal minority that has just kind of fallen out of it. And it's been a different situation there. I found the thing I found that was irritating, though, was, it was barely a month ago that the latest big debate was why Neil Bonnet was being brought in as a Hall of Fame nominee, and saying, oh, well, what has he done? And why is he deserving of being up there? When in reality, he had several things very similar to Darrell Waltrip, and yet the reaction was very different when it came to the issue of Darrell Waltrip being brought out of the booth, and what was alleged to be a hit piece, and we'll go into that next too. That again, here's another driver turned announcer. Here's another person that had many accomplishments, and yet that's not treated with the same reverence that Neil Bonnet was. That with Neil Bonnet, it's like, oh, why is he even up here? Why do we even need to consider him for the Hall of Fame? And this other one, if somebody even suggests that he shouldn't be in the booth anymore, suddenly that's like a big controversy. Suddenly everybody just loses their minds on that, and everybody, and the other part of it too is that there seemed to be this meme about not having media attacking media, and yet at the same blush, everybody was jumping on Jenna Fryer pretty quickly about this. And I'm not saying like, nobody's perfect. Everybody has like their different angles and everything like that, and everybody has a different tone, and maybe some people don't get along as well as other people. But I found it very strange to say, oh, well, you can't beat up on Darrell Waltrip. But okay, let's just jump on Jenna Fryer here about what she was saying and about expressing these very legitimate concerns about Darrell Waltrip. And this brings me to the article itself and the tone of it. Now, this has been dealt with much better by both David Land on his YouTube channel and Kamikaze Games on his channel. I just listened to both their videos the other day, and especially at Kamikaze Games, I felt that he did very humorous, but also very concise analysis of the article, where when you really look at it, these are criticisms being leveled at Darrell Waltrip and by extension, Fox itself and Fox's overall approach to the broadcasts. And I think that, and when you really looked at things like that, it's not saying that Darrell Waltrip's a bad person. It's not saying that he's not worthy of respect. It's not saying that the man hasn't given and continues to give everything for the sport of stock car racing, both as a driver and an announcer. And it's not even saying that he was never good in the booth. I mean, he was outstanding. When he came in, everybody remembers that, he was absolutely, just a breath of fresh air, that he was very new to this whole thing, even though he had been a part-time announcer before with TNN, but developing his own brand. He very much became the face of what Fox's NASCAR broadcasts are. I mean, yes, you have Mike Joy. Yes, you have other veterans like him, like Matt Yoakum on pit road, and yes, you have other people that came in as analysts like Larry McReynolds. But Darrell Waltrip was really been the face of Fox Sports, and that's exactly the different situation. But it's the problem is that, again, the way that the sport has changed, it is changed in a way where it almost feels quaint now, which is unfortunate. That Darrell Waltrip's particular tone and particular approach to the sport is very much a time capsule of that peak of the sport back in the early 2000s. And very much so, just like we were talking about with Bristol today, when you see that they have all these huge stands, all these seats, where it's designed for 160,000 people to be sitting in there, and then it's maybe barely a third full, and that's what you have in there. That's very much what Darrell Waltrip is like. It's the big grandstand, but it's not fitting with the same people. There's a disconnect there a little bit. And it doesn't hurt to actually kind of bring that up. And and I think that I want to get these other notes, because I'm kind of going wide of the mark here on this. This was mentioned by David Land, and I think he really hit this on the head, talking about that, the thing with Darrell Waltrip, and even he admitted this in his interview at Bristol the other day, and we'll go into that as well, that he stayed in the sport too long. He stayed as a driver for too long in the sport. That he thought in the past that maybe when he sold his team in 1998, when that speed block and that HQ company laid him high and dry, and he had to shut down the team at Darlington. I mean, a terrible set of circumstances there. I mean, thankfully, he still has the shop as a museum, and he's able to operate that. That was a sea change in the sport there and his career. And he admitted that he viewed his driving career and his career as a race car driver as his identity, and he couldn't think of anything beyond that. And so he just kept going, and he drove for Travis Carter those last couple of years, and then ultimately retired in 2000. Very much the same thing in the broadcast booth. I mean, again, probably, again, it was fresh, it was new, it was very different, it was very exciting. It fit with the times, with the, because you had a lot of those veterans there. That some of them, and of course, there wasn't a big difference because there were a lot of these guys that had raced with Waltrip before. I mean, that's the other thing you got to think about. You still had, even after Dale's passing, you still had Dale Jarrett, you still had Sterling Marlin, you had Bill Elliott, you had Ricky Rudd, you had guys that knew Darrell Waltrip from way back, and it started way back then. But as the time passed and those guys left, and you started having these new guys come in here, okay, yeah, Waltrip is seeing these guys come up through the ranks, but he no longer has that connection with them as somebody they grew up with. And that was kind of something that it reminded me a little bit of what happened with ESPN. And one reason that ESPN's old broadcast was a success. In interviewing Ned Jarrett, when I was doing that for the J.D. McDuffie book there, he had talked about how how close they were with a lot of the drivers in the garage area, that they knew them, that they knew the names of their wives and their children, that they knew what was going on in their lives, and they didn't have to audition. They didn't have to prepare a lot for their broadcast, because they just knew what was going on. This was their own passion. And then when the cameras turned on, they would just kind of talk about it, just like, I mean, it almost felt like a podcast, really. You know, they would have that information. So they didn't have to do a whole lot of preparation, because that was just their own experience. But then when you don't have that anymore, when you have these new guys that are coming in there, and it's nothing that's Darrell Waltrip's fault. I mean, you have these other new guys coming in there. That happens all the time. Waltrip himself was a guy like that. Waltrip actually filled that role both as a driver and as a broadcaster. You realize he was the guy that came in the 1970s and was kind of just saying, hey, you know, these drivers like Richard Petty and Cale Yarborough, they're great and everything, but they don't talk to the media. They don't engage. They don't have like enough of a personality. So he wanted to, you know, be the change that he wanted to see in the world, and he wanted to do that. And when he was a broadcaster, especially when he came on with Fox, it was very much like that too, that you had people like Ken Squire and such that were around for many years. And then you just completely had a cutoff there with the new Fox NBC agreement and a chance to just start something completely new. And once again, just like back in the 70s as a driver, he was that new face again. He was that new personality that was very much the face of something new again. But again, that time goes by, and then you have that little bit of a disconnect, and people start realizing that there are, you know, some things that they don't like in the broadcast, or some things that are missing. And when you stick with the same routine, even when things change, that gets noticed, and maybe not by everybody, but some people notice it. So that's one part of that. Let's see. And, you know, and talking about, you know, the response to Jenna Fryer's article, and especially by people within the Fox Sports community, you hear from, like, you know, Matt Yoakum or Kenny Wallace and these other guys. They're circling the wagons, and you can understand why. You know, think about if you're on a sports team or something like that, and somebody says something bad about your quarterback or something like that. Well, you want to stand behind that guy, assuming you like him. You stand behind that guy, and that's what everybody's doing. You know, and so you have a lot of these on there. Now, with I do feel that some of it was a little bit tone deaf. I think that there were some, and we'll get into these too here, that it was a little bit, it was kind of exaggerating things a little bit as to, again, what the article was and was not saying, what it did and did not represent, and what even media's role should and should not be. These are all topics that I think both contributed both to concerns over the article, as well as concerns over Darrell Waltrip himself in the booth. So here's the thing. One thing I found particularly interesting is the Kenny Wallace video, the video that Kenny Wallace posted on Twitter the other day, where he was very flat out condemning of Jenna Fryer for even writing the article, for even suggesting any kind of, disrespect of Darrell Waltrip, or at least that was perceived. And I think that kind of came to symbolize a lot of the outrage that was surrounding it, at least from that side of the argument. Kenny Wallace is an interesting figure because, there's, I think, in some ways, as much as I like him as a competitor, he always views me, I always view him as very much the underdog in there, certainly compared to his brother Rusty, and to a degree with his brother Mike as well. Sometimes Kenny is very much like Michael Waltrip, where he gets a little sidetracked on just the surface analysis of something, and what he, like a passionate misunderstanding of something. And the Jenna Fryer thing was very much like that, because I remember, not to make everything about me, but this is from my own personal experience. Back in 2016, I believe it was, when Landon Castle finished last the first two races of the year. And I was doing a statistic about that and getting in a discussion about that, because it had been the first time that somebody finished last in the first two races of the year since NASCAR's first season back in 1949. And I pointed out the statistic, and it got some attention. I talked with Mike Joy about it, and he was like saying, oh, well, he technically didn't finish last in that when he was disqualified in that race. And I'm glad he brought that up, because that actually allowed me to make a change to my website, where I actually broke down what my definition of a last place finisher was and what it was not. And it was important to define my terms, because otherwise that statistic, wouldn't really mean anything. So I appreciated that input. That is constructive criticism. That is a constructive issue. What Kenny Wallace soon did in the moments after that was, now I'm feeling good about this. I'm feeling good about, like, hey, I got some good information that can make my site better. I got the statistic out there, got featured on JSki, it was on the top of the page. I'm feeling happy about this. So what does Kenny Wallace do? He comes out there and says, oh, how could somebody do that? How could somebody, talk about these guys finishing last and do that like it's okay? I mean, I don't remember the words exactly, but I know he was just dumping on this. And I was like, wait, where is this coming from? And when I point out, it's like, look, I mean, it happens when you finish last. It happens, and it's one of those things. And Kenny Wallace, I pointed this out, and it's like, look, I mean, Kenny, you were one of the past last car champions. I mean, it happens, but you recover from it and you improve from it, and it's not something that you are stuck in for all eternity. It's just a thing that happens in a race. It's easier. I mean, somebody can finish last just as easily as winning a race in some cases, and in some cases it's even easier still. I mean, just look at what happened today with Almirola. You just make one left turn, and suddenly you're last in the race. Doesn't mean you're a bad driver. Doesn't mean you had a bad car. Doesn't mean you had a bad race. Doesn't mean you had the wrong strategy. Well, maybe you had the wrong strategy. Maybe your crew didn't understand the rules. But that's an aside. And I was frustrated like this because around the same time, I had done an article on Kenny for my Throwback Thursday feature, and Kenny didn't like that one either. And he was like, look, he's like, well, you're talking about me finishing last. So I was like, look. And I was like, okay, look, let's break bread about this, because I want to do, look at, clearly you're not satisfied with my perception of this part of your career. So let's do an interview, and you can say your side of the story. We'll do an interview. You can talk with me. We'll get this all set up here. And we'll do that, and then it'll be. I think that'll be a great way to kind of, we could develop a relationship here, maybe, and just kind of, I can learn more about you. You can learn more about what I'm doing. Never heard back. Never. So, so was I surprised that he came down on Jenna Fryer like this on this article? No, not really. I'm disappointed, but it is what it is. I mean, everybody is circling the wagons over at Fox Sports. Maybe they feel compelled to, because Darrell Waltrip is, again, the face of this franchise and everything. But it's interesting because you got everybody doing this now, kind of doing the defensive thing a little bit. But it's at the same time, you don't really have what's going to happen is, of course, is what happened with Jenna Fryer is just the beginning. If people see that Darrell Waltrip is retiring, and again, we'll talk about his interview from Bristol, that this was a different deal. The situation there is what you're going to have next is the knives are going to come out. People are going to be defending Darrell Waltrip and all that, but then the knives are going to come out, because now everybody's going to be wondering, oh shoot, is this going to be the first domino? Is somebody else going to get removed? Is somebody else going to get replaced? Because in my mind, Darrell Waltrip was going to be the guy that, when they changed everything at Fox, whenever they were going to finally do that, I figured he'd be the last man standing, because I'd always heard that Darrell was instrumental in organizing the people that were around him and setting up the broadcast the very way that it was. And he has to be, applauded and thanked for that, because that did work for many years. And, and there's still parts of it that do work now. Now it's a very different situation. I'm seeing your comment there. Yeah, Matt, the Benedetto fan. I'm trying to remember. I know it was on Twitter that we had this discussion on it. I don't know if that was, I think I just emailed him about the interview, so I don't know if that's publicly available, but it was back in 2016, and the Landon Castle stat, I believe that was on Twitter. It was something like that. I'll see if I can find the link, and then you can actually see that. NASCAR 2016. I mean, it might be the old JSki archives there, but it's going to be different. Yeah, posted. Yeah, 2015. Okay, it's even further ago. I'm just looking at the ones on JSki there. getting the article here. I don't want to lose too much of my flow here, but we'll get some more information on that on there. I know it's on Twitter. You guys probably even find it even quicker than I had, but I mean, again, it wasn't a big like epic feud, but it was. I'm just saying, like he didn't do like a video thing like he did with the Jenna Fryer thing. It was just a bit of an interaction on. It was kind of a one-sided conversation on social media, and it didn't go much further than that. But again, yeah, he was clearly not happy about the statistic, me bringing it up and it getting attention, and he was also not happy about me doing an article on him finishing last in a race. Well, okay, that's what I do. It is what it is. Again, it doesn't make you a bad race car driver. It doesn't mean I don't like these people or something, even if that's supposed to even matter. Because when you're a journalist, well, we're going to get into this too. When you're a journalist, you got to be objective to a certain degree. Now, I know Darrell had some thoughts on that. We're going to get into that too. So let me. I'll see if I can find the link here before, but I'll if anybody else finds it in the meantime, definitely let me know. I'm pretty sure it is on Twitter, but I definitely know that was in thing. Oh, you know what? I might even have a screen cap of it. Maybe that would be even better. Do I have that from that? I don't want to take up put too much dead air on here. First step, final lap, photos. I think that was Michael Annette, Jeff Green, number 24, Richmond. Oh, you know what? Maybe that was in. I don't think it's even in that folder. I think that's in. So you got too many folders in this. Other notes. This one might run a little long today, everyone. Kenny. Oh, here we go. March 2nd, 2015. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. I got them. I got screen caps. Even better. Oh, okay. Well, I got my response too. That probably contributed a little bit to that too. Here we go. I'll post these here so you can see those. And we'll get you a little bit of bonus content here. Can I post pictures on this? I got the links. Can we do picture posts on this? That'd be nice. I don't know if we can. I'm not sure if we can get that here. Because I'd like to actually have that so you can actually see it. I don't really want to post it on Twitter because I don't want to start. I also not interested at all in kickstarting anything on this too. But yeah, I'll read it here in the meantime. Let's see if I can get this here. I do have the files on this. Actually, maybe can I just drag it into here? I'm still figuring out this program here in the meantime, guys. So I apologize. I'm fumbling around this here like a 90-year-old man here trying to get this thing to work. So we're going to figure this out together. Okay, let's try this. Let's try this. All right. Does this work? Ah, okay. Wait, whoa. No. Cancel. Don't want to leave. Don't want to leave. Okay. It's not going to let me attach the picture here without backing out of the chat, and I don't want to do that. Let me do this. Oh, here we go. We got a camera. Let's do this. I'll turn this over here, and you can see. I'll show you it exactly on the screen here. So let's take the camera off this deal. Get the shaky cam on here. I'm not sure if this shows up here very well, but so this is the response that I had. The original picture there is from Jayski's website there when it got featured on the website. And so Kenny has got something on here where it says, "Why would anyone advertise such a dismal stat is beyond me. Hashtag seriously." And, and then, so, okay. So that's, again, this is about as far as it went. It wasn't a full-on video or anything like that, but clearly he wasn't happy about this. And this was, my response in there. It's like, look, it's like, I'm offended, Kenny. You of all people should know journeyman drivers need all the press they can get. And I put hashtag 1998 last car champ. Because yeah, I mean, again, and we've seen this before. I mean, again, I don't want to make this all about Kenny because that's just going to be a further, exaggeration of all the stuff that's been going on in the news this past week. But I think back. I remember when he was talking smack about the Eel River Racing team and how the cars were so slow, and and that. Okay, yeah, no driver's going to like driving slow cars or anything like that, but at the same time, there's got to be a little bit of a dividing line there. So those are the pictures on there. I'm not sure how well you're able to see on camera there, but I do have those screen caps from this. That was back in 2015. And I do remember, yeah, the issue with the article came up about the same time. Let's see. The model, yeah. We'll get definitely doesn't show well mobile. Okay, yeah. All right. We're gonna have to do maybe. Oh, you know what? Let's see. What would be a good place to put these? I could put them. I could put them on my Patreon and just have them publicly available. Again, I don't want to. I don't want to do anything that's going to be that. But let me post those. Maybe like an Imgur site. Let me just do that. I'll put on an Imgur link. Does that site still exist? I can't even remember anymore. But I don't want to. Again, I don't want to spend too much more time on this here while we talk about Darrell Waltrip here, because I do have some more thoughts on that. In particular, his interview at Bristol this past week. Let's put this here. Okay. And we're going to copy this. I think I got the link here. Okay, here we go. Perfect. Let's just do this. I got it on the Imgur link here. I'll post this on here. Kenny Wallace posts. Oh. Okay. Let me know, guys, if that link doesn't work. We can try something different here, but we'll use that in the meantime. That's where you find the urinating tree memes. Well, there you go. So that's even better. But yeah, again, but this is, again, the issue on here, I think that, let's see. I think the big thing, and again, to kind of round off the subject we were just talking about here on this with the Waltrip one, let me bring the camera a bit closer here. Is that, okay, good, it worked, excellent. So, this isn't excluding myself. I'm very much cognizant that I'm doing the media thing here too, that there are certain ethics you work with, there are certain things that you do, and there's a lot of disparity about what the rules actually are and are not. You got a lot of people, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about that this week, about like, does this need to be written? Does this need to be written by me? And then even more abstract concepts like, okay, well, is this, is this being nice? Is this being whatever? I mean, okay, some story. I mean, you got to take some stories as you find them. I mean, when I did the article on, for example, bringing this back to what we talked about earlier, when I did the article on what happened at Las Vegas with Carl Long's team, I didn't go in there. My goal in writing that wasn't to make fun of the team and say, oh, what a bunch of losers. They can't even get their engine guy to the track. That would have been petty. That would have been stupid. I know there's a lot of people that follow LASCAR for a comedic aspect of it. And there is that aspect of it. Unavoidably there is. Just the concept is weird to follow last place finishers. But what I did is I just put all the information I knew in there and said, hey, you'd probably be interested to know this is what was going on. This is why they didn't pull out of the race until later. And ultimately, this was why they ran the Las Vegas or the Nevada branch of the Donate Life sponsorship in Fontana, even though I'm sure they had an LA branch they could have just as easily put on the car. It's because they only were out there for a few laps and that Carl Long worked out a deal. That was all communicated over the radio. That wasn't part of their social media. So by following that story, that was how we were able to get that information. So I think it's more important to get that information and to understand it. I mean, and look, there's humorous things about this. If you have it, I mean, I don't need to make it funny. I don't need to make it into some kind of parody or something like that. Luckily in this particular case, it was a situation where, the guy's still at the hotel. Maybe he got stuck in traffic or something like that. And it made an interesting story and it got the 66 team some attention. And, who knows, maybe, I'd like to believe it would maybe help those guys. That's not my interest necessarily, but I mean, my interest is really just to talk about these teams and drivers that don't get talked about that much. People do with that what they want. But, this is a different situation with that. So it's there's a lot of differences in here. But when I think about what happened with Darrell Waltrip and a lot of the debates here, although in Darrell's interview at Bristol, he was saying that this was actually a decision he was thinking about for years. This wasn't something caused by Jenna Fryer's article. This wasn't something that was brought about by that. At least he was very clear in saying that. And that he was thinking of even retiring in 2017 so that he could have it be like 17 years in the booth and tie back to kind of like his Daytona 500 win. But look, I'm still a media member just as much as like any of these other guys and everything like that. If my work is slipping, if my work quality is not at the level that it needs to be, I expect you guys to keep me on point. I expect you guys to point out to me. I don't want you guys to pretend that everything's fine for any other reason or something just because it's been around for however many years. And I know I don't really need to say this for a lot of you guys, because what's great about it is that like we've had in this chat just now, you guys correct me when I get something wrong on that, like that. Yeah, you bring it up. I want to make sure we get this right, because of what's happening with a lot of these smaller teams is that a lot of times the mem is that who cares? Everybody's saying, well, who cares? This is just some team that's running 25th or 30th in a race. Who cares who's driving the car? But it matters. It matters if Brandon Brown's not in the 86 car and they're putting Mason Diaz in the car instead. That's a big difference given that the performance they've had this year, and then putting somebody else in the car. And is Brown going to run another car? I mean, that's a big story. So again, that's the big issue on that. So it's really trying to make that in here. And again, I don't. And I see your comment there, Beast of Metal, and I need to clarify what I'm saying here. I mean, I'm not writing the website to be a parody website, and I know that you guys see that. You see that it's just saying, look, it's who, what, when, where, why. It's just the very strictest day at the races thing, but from the back of the field, and it's telling you exactly the principles involved. It's telling you the things that happen that we were able to find out. We don't know the information. We're not going to speculate on it. We're just going to give you the best information that we can. And piece by piece, I've been figuring that out through this process here and trying to find the best way to approach it. But again, if there's something in there that's incorrect, if there's something in there that doesn't, that comes off as unprofessional, if the quality of the work is slipping, I would expect my readers to tell me that. I don't want them to hide that from me, because I want to produce this because it matters. I want this content to be the very best that it can. And I think that maybe this is the reason that Darrell Waltrip was already thinking about retiring when he was doing it, is maybe he was thinking, maybe it's very possible that he thought that maybe the quality of his own work wasn't as good as he wanted it to be. I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but if it were me, that's what I would be thinking. That's where it needs to be. And again, I'm putting it this way because I can only know my own experience. I can't pretend to know somebody else's experience on this, but I can bring it as close together as possible. So I want to let me go over the other. Yeah, exactly. Everything's great. The other angle of it here, but yeah. I have a note in here that I wrote down. It's just like, feelings are not more important than the work that needs to be done. They're not. I mean, at the end of the day, you should have the right to demand more of professionals. You should demand more of people who are in positions of like communicating information and positions of influence in a sense, because there could be a lot of effect. I mean, I don't know. I mean, this is a very small corner of this we're talking about. I mean, I have no illusions about what LastCar is and representing how many teams. I know how many hits the website gets and everything like that, and I'm thankful absolutely for every one of you guys that follow the website there, because we are definitely not Junior Nation. We are not a large group of people, but we are a very committed group, and I admire your dedication just like I admire the dedication of the people on the website. I don't want you guys to forget that. And again, that's the only thing that I really want to make sure I get from you guys there in the meantime. Yeah, you guys just keep me honest, make sure that the work is the level that it is, and that it continues to go the trend that it is. I always think back to, I think one of the most critical things that happened in my own career with this website so far was when Jason Leffler passed away in 2013. On top of the aspect of the website there where we talked about where right where we started to make the website and realize that JD McDuffie hit the record for the most last place finishes. That right there made it clear that the approach to the website had to be of respect, had to be of a manner where, okay, yes, this was the last place finisher, but also acknowledging that these are drivers that they didn't seek finishing last. I mean, that's phrased in there so that you can have season-long competitions. You read, 6 articles about Jeff Green, and there's something different going on there because there's an overall framing device. It's a framing device to talk about these drivers. But with Jason Leffler, I had written an article after he passed away in that sprint car accident, and I was saying, look, in the few days ahead, you're going to hear a lot more about this guy, this driver. You're going to hear more about his family. You're going to hear more about the fact that he won Toyota's first Xfinity race years ago. You're going to hear about all these things. You're going to hear these things about a driver who just last Sunday you only heard about at NASCAR because he finished last in that race driving the Humphrey Smith Motorsports. And it was arrogant. I mean, I pointed out. I mean, it was a true fact. It was a true fact. But in reading the article that I wrote for that race, I didn't really give that much information in there. A lot of the older NASCAR articles, if you look at this 10th anniversary, you hear this now. You look back at the articles 2009, they're very short. It's just beginning, middle, end. It's just this guy finished last. Here's some statistics, and that's it. And it wasn't until really after Leffler's accident that I felt that the articles needed to have a bit more context in there, that we need to bring up more about these drivers and about these teams and why they do the things they do, and also kind of play off things that happened with this team in previous races, and kind of have a continuing narrative through the article that that draws as many of those aspects in there as possible. That was really a big point on that. So I see your comment on the trains. I just want to finish this thought here before I do that. But that was a big part of that. So that's just actually that's pretty much is the closing part of my thought on that. That was kind of the thing that is my approach to that, and I think that that's a part of with Darrell Waltrip that is a different aspect. Let me talk about the Matt Benedetto fan. Quick story on the trains there, the model trains in the background. I think you saw that. I'm trying to remember which aspect there, and it was the those are actually my brother is really big into doing like N scale modeling on trains. He sets up he has a setup in the garage that he's working on there, and he's been very passionate about that. I grew up liking trains too, but my brother is much more into that there. He's done actually a lot more hands-on work with that kind of thing there. So that's really more of a passion on his end. Maybe we'll do something more on that in the future there, and show you kind of some other collections there. But very cool that you have a layout there in your basement, Matt, the Benedetto fan. It'd be interesting to know, what scale it is and things like that. I'm not as knowledgeable in the verbiage as he would be, but that's where you see that. If you saw that by the setup next to the TV there, that's where we have the train set up there. So that's always the interesting part. So let me HO scale. Okay. Oh, you got a much bigger setup there. At least that's from what I hear. That's a lot bigger setup there. So that's a good place for a break here anyway, because I want to kind of regroup into this here, and this is the other part. This is basically to kind of wrap up the Darrell Waltrip aspect here. I want to talk about the actual. Oh, okay. We should be expecting the results from technical inspection any minute here. We're going to take a look at the Bob Pockris page here in the meantime and see if anything new has come through. And if we have a call, we'll extend this here a bit to cover the last part of what I want to cover here in the meantime. Update from Keselowski. Okay, no new news on the inspection yet. So we should be expecting that any minute now. No new information here at the moment. So again, welcome everybody. I see 7 people in the chat here. Thank you again for tuning in as we wrap up the action from Bristol, and now also going to wrap up the last part of my thoughts here on the Darrell Waltrip situation. We've talked a lot about the aspect of older people in media, about Darrell Waltrip's particular role in the sport, about his role in the broadcast booth, and the difficulty of being in a position where maybe the quality of your work has changed, or the environment around you has changed, you haven't changed with it, or have not been perceived to be those are kind of the issues that we've talked about here. All of this kind of came together into the press conference that was over this past weekend, and what had happened there. I want to talk about the press conference they had at Bristol, which first of all was a really nice press conference. I really appreciated Bristol taking the effort and having some time there. And you had Darrell and you had his wife Stevie there, and a very nice setup there. And it was really cool to hear from Darrell, as a person, because I think that one complaint that a lot of people have had about Darrell Waltrip is that he falls into kind of this persona. That there's his persona is very much like the character from the Cars movie, or just kind of these malapropisms and catchphrases and stuff like that, and non sequiturs that kind of just go around, and everybody just goes, oh, okay, there he goes again. It was very nice to hear him in a more subdued manner, but in the same time, there were a couple of points that he made in there that I think are very telling about broadcasting in general and about his perception of broadcasting. And I think I want to draw more attention to these. At about 8.5 minutes into the video, Darrell Waltrip addressed the issue of Kyle Busch him being a big fervent supporter of Kyle Busch. And this was part of this was played during the broadcast actually today when Kyle was running away with the lead. And this race actually is a pretty good example of what I'm about to bring up here. Darrell was basically saying in his interview during the press conference that everybody's biased, that nobody is completely objective and nobody is doing anything like that. And while I get what he's saying to the letter of that okay, yes, there's again, for example, what I do on the website here, I'm just looking at the back end of the field. I'm not looking at the leader. You could construe that as a bias if you like, or something like that. If there were times where I was trying to write about Danica Patrick and people get angry at me because it's like, look, that's not a small team. That's not a small story. Get that out of here. It's like, okay, well, all right. Well, we'll just wait till she finishes last and then we'll talk about her. That I feel was a bit of a cop out, I think, to be quite honest. And I think back to Dale Jarrett, I think back to Ned Jarrett calling Dale Jarrett home at the end of the 1993 Daytona 500. What made that moment special in 1993 was that it was exceptional. Ned Jarrett was very classically trained in broadcasting, as has been brought up in social media there. He grew, not only he retired at the top of his game, he was still a very young man and, just starting to raise his family there at the time that he retired from the Cup Series. And he took classes actually to overcome stage fright and work on his screen presence, and had been very active in media well before he even got picked up by ESPN in 1981, and became really the voice of kind of the technical aspect of those broadcasts. This was he was very professional, and always has been. Was very professional in when I'd spoken with him as well. But the 1993 Daytona 500, when he watches Dale Jarrett finish the race and he's calling him home, it's very reminiscent of a typical Darrell Waltrip call of Kyle Busch. That you have somebody where he's just like, oh my gosh, this is just the most amazing thing, and this is great. Although of course it's very different in Ned Jarrett's case, because of course it's his son. Of course he's going to be doing it. And in the words of the late Dale Earnhardt, don't forget I'm a daddy too. He knows that. That he knows what that meant to Ned, and he knew why he was that excited. And even though Ned was conscious of a potential lack of professionalism in what he perceived that to be, it's still remembered as one of the greatest calls, certainly the Daytona 500 finishes. And in that, it's the exception. The problem is that when you talk about Darrell Waltrip in the same context, it's the rule. It's the rule with him, and that's a very different thing. Hang on. Let's see here. Okay. I think I have a knock at the door here. So I'm going to touch on the other point here in just a moment. Let me mute the mic here. I'll be back in just a second. We'll hit on the other point here, I promise. Oh, there we go. There we go. Can you hear me now? I had it on mute. I apologize. Well, let me go back to what I was saying. I was just summing up what I was saying earlier. Um, what we had talked about earlier was the issue with Ned Jarrett's call, the 1993 Daytona 500, and how that was the exception. It was not the rule. Can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure we're good here before I go too much further here. It originally has like a wavelength thing at the bottom of the screen, but it doesn't show here. Does it sound okay? Okay, good. You got me. All right. Okay, good. So I'll move past this pretty quick then. So yes, talking about Ned Jarrett and the exceptional call that he gave to Dale Jarrett at the time there to win the Daytona 500 in 1993. That was something very different, and it wasn't something that. What the other part I was going to bring up is that Ned Jarrett didn't make a weekly habit of that. It wasn't like in every broadcast you would say, "Oh, well, Dale Jarrett's running in fifth," or "Dale Jarrett is the most amazing driver out there," and Dale Jarrett's doing this and doing that. And it's like, no, that would be the equivalent of what Darrell Waltrip's approach has been to hyping up Kyle Busch, and that's been the big problem with that, and that detracts really from the broadcast because there's so many other people out there and there's so many other competitors out there. It doesn't need that call all the time. And it's even more absurd in Kyle Busch's case when he is winning everything. And okay, yes, it's not saying that Kyle Busch isn't amazing. Kyle Busch isn't a big story right now. He certainly seems to have all the momentum in the world heading into Richmond, which is another track that he's very dominant at. But when you're in the booth, you are not there to be a cheerleader. You're not there to just be some abstract cheerleader. There's professionalism is there. And as much as I don't like accusing Darrell Waltrip of being unprofessional, I think there's a possibility of, because I mean, people slip up. I mean, there's things that happen, especially live TV and all that. He mentioned that. I think that the aspect of the Kyle Busch situation is unprofessional in that sense. I think it detracts from the quality of the broadcast, and it detracts from from the quality of what he does there. And we see this a little bit with some of the others. I know that Jeff Gordon's been accused of the same things with the Hendrick Motorsports drivers and with Chase Elliott in particular. It's a very different thing. But yes, the routine, yes. I mean, as you're saying, they're beasts of metal. That's really the issue there. And when you have that, I don't buy. I thought Darrell was very flippant about that in his interview during the press conference. I think he's like, "Oh, well, everybody's biased. Every one of you is biased." It's like, well, okay, that's true, but not accurate. Everybody may be biased, but they don't show that bias. They don't put it out there, and they don't make it like a theme. They don't make it like a meme or something in these broadcasts. That's the problem. And the other problem is when you're a TV broadcaster, it's much more visible than it is when you're writing articles or when you're doing something else like that, because everybody's just trying to watch the race. Everybody's trying to watch the race and trying to find out what's happening. And all we're getting in the background here is just a bunch of this hooting and hollering about one other particular driver in the field. And that's not, first of all, it's not fair to the other drivers, and it's also not fair to the audience. And that's a thing I take issues with. That's a very different thing here. And this leads to my second point here. About a minute later, about 9.5 minutes into the video, and these are the timestamps I have. Actually, I said it was 8.5 minutes earlier for the first part. I have about 8 minutes 53 seconds in the video. This is on the main Fox Sports channel. 9.5 minutes into the video, he said this quote here: "You do about the drivers out of the field, about the NASCAR drivers that are competing on the track today." His angle was for the broadcast: "You do this much, we'll do the rest, but you got to do this much." And I thought that was interesting because he was distinguishing what he was doing in this context is he was distinguishing radio from television. And that when you're doing a radio broadcast, you have to ramp it up. There's a lot of, because you have to paint the picture in everyone's mind, and you can't have dead air. You have to actually communicate the best aspects of this broadcast and actually say, like, okay, they're door to door, they're close there. You emphasize like the colors of the cars. You do all the great things that the greats like Barney Hall and all the other ones have done. And his argument was that a TV broadcast can't be that it has that and to a degree he's right, because yeah, you don't need to fill the air with constant action. If there's a little bit of quiet in between, if you just want to hear the cars come by, and I'm not talking about like a crank it up segment. I'm talking about just where the rhythm of the broadcast wants an actual silence in there. That's fine. But the issue that I took with his quote is that like this quid pro quo, this tit for tat thing that was going on here, where it's somehow, if the broadcast, I got the feeling from what he was saying this, that you do this much, we'll do the rest, but you've got to do this much. It was like, if the drivers somehow aren't competing enough, or the racing isn't good enough, then suddenly the broadcasters have carte blanche to just do a broadcast that's not as good. Then suddenly they can't be blamed because their broadcast isn't very good during the broadcast, because there's nothing that they can talk about. And that is the problem. This is an issue I feel that's endemic with a lot of these current broadcasts here. Like they say, okay, yeah, sometimes we embellish things, we make things up. Well, there's some problematic things in the language there too. But it's the issue is that there's, just because a race is, I think when a race is not very interesting, you have to actually find something that's happening, and you have to make something out of it and actually do a broadcast call of it. Hi there, Sir Rickelstein. We're talking about Darrell Waltrip. We're talking about his press conference at Bristol and what he was talking about with broadcast angles. And the aspect we're talking about here is we're talking about the on-track product, and somehow, if there's it was interesting, because it was interesting to me when he was saying that the broadcaster's job is to do the rest, but there's a caveat there where if the racing isn't interesting, there's not much they can do. Well, I don't buy that. Like, what are they going to do? They're just going to stand there like at Texas and just eat ice cream? I mean, that's ridiculous. You go in there and you do a broadcast call. Watch a broadcast from a few years ago, a few decades ago, for a race that's not very good. Like, I mean, watch like the 2000 Daytona 500, or watch, that race at Michigan in 1999 where Dale Jarrett led the whole thing. There weren't any cautions and one guy fell out. They still find a way to make the broadcast interesting. And the reason they make that broadcast interesting is something that Ken Squire brought up in his interview with Kyle Petty. And this is something I want to bring full circle with this too. When you watch Kyle Petty's interview with Ken Squire, and I highly recommend you watch this too, because it's very instructive as to what a broadcast should be. He talked very much, and first of all, Ken Squire is sharp as a tack. When Kyle Petty misquoted him on something or got something incorrect, he would say it right away. Like Kyle saying something about Ken Squire's quote where he says like, it's ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And he said, no, deeds. It's extraordinary deeds. He was very quick, very polite, but very quick to correct him. And the reason that he does that is because there's a very proper way of doing that. And I think what the current Fox booth feels they need to do is they need to just throw a bunch of cartoony stuff around, or they need to scream and yell over the top of each other or anything like that. But in Ken Squire's view and how he approached it, especially from the start in 1979, and even before that, running the original short track race years before that Bobby Isaac dominated, he emphasized the stories through the field, and that these drivers are worthy of respect, and that you describe them in such a way that you are making heroes. You are not merely describing cars going in circles. You are describing men and women doing the very best they can to compete, and you are putting them forward in such a way that you want people to be engaged with them. You want people to be excited about these people, and it's a very delicate balance. But and Ken Squire's video again is very instructive in this, because you listen to some of his older calls, and that's the way he's approaching it. He's actually talking about these competitors, and he's slowing things down, and he's actually giving things greater context. And it gives everything so much more weight and so much more consequence. And I know I'm throwing around a lot of words here that don't. I mean, it sounds very nebulous. It sounds very kind of up in the air, and it's hard to figure out exactly the way to articulate it. And that's because it is difficult. But you know it when you hear it. You know when you hear a call that's not engaging, and it's something that makes you not interested in what's happening in the race. And you know when you hear a call that pulls you into the race, that pulls you into the action, that is going to be something you are going to remember. And again, I mentioned a while back about Dr. Jerry Punch's call with Dale Earnhardt's last win at Talladega, and saying that Dale Earnhardt has gone from 18th position to lead it in 5 laps, like breaking down that information to inform people, but to do it with an element of style, to do it with a bit of professionalism, of gravitas, that you are not being the story, you are conveying the story, and you are painting that picture. Just because TV is there and you have all these cameras, you can see all these cars do the things there. And this was another thing that Darrell Waltrip brought up in his interview. He said that, oh, well, when you do a TV broadcast, it is what it is. But in radio, you can embellish things and make it sound more exciting than it is. But in TV, you can't do that. No. That needs to stop. This is something that really needs to change. And perhaps Darrell Waltrip stepping aside will allow people to kind of figure this out better. When the racing isn't as interesting, that's when you really see the professionalism of people that really do know their craft, because they will find a story. They will find a story, even if it's in the garage area, or if it's somewhere on pit road, or if it's somebody in the field there, and they will give you updates about what's happening in the race, and they will make it interesting. It's not an easy thing to do, but again, you demand the most from professionals. You expect them to do the very best that they can. And so that was the thing that I felt was again kind of a cop out there in his interview. And he's saying, like, well, look, like, if the race is what it is, there's only so much we can do with it. Well, that's true, but at the same time, if you're engaged enough in it, if you are engaged in it, and you are able to maintain a professional distance in accounting for it, you can deliver a great call. You can do something like Bob Jenkins or Ned Jarrett can do. Getting dried out here, but that's really a big issue with that, and I think that's where things go awry. So, and I think the worst thing you can do is do something where it's going to be where you make it really obvious that you're not interested in the broadcast, or you just don't make it sound like you're engaged. I think I'm seeing in the chat here people bringing up the issues with the duels and talking about the open team battles. Okay, there was some of that in there, but you notice what was happening during that same duels broadcast. I believe it was during race 2. They said, like, oh, well, race 1 wasn't very exciting. Well, this one's going to be even more. This one's going to be really crazy and all that. And then there was a part of the race where they just sat there and there's just the cars going by. They would go by one stationary camera, and they'd go by another one, and then they would go by another one, and there'd just be nothing. And it's just like no commentary, just cars going single file. Now, I get that a single file race, interstructure plate race, isn't very interesting, but it's your job to make it interesting. It's your job to make it compelling. It's your job to know the drivers and competitors and what's at stake and what's happening and where it is in the context of the season and where it is in the context of the week and why it matters and why people should be excited about it. Those are the things you need to be doing. If you are not doing that, if you are just passively reacting to things, if it's just like a reaction video, you're like, oh, hey, what happened there? And oh, look at that. What happened there? That's not interesting. Nobody watches that. I know that reaction videos are big on YouTube. They don't belong on a broadcast. There should be more expected of them, and that's the other issue there with that. So those are the only big things that I had with that. The only things, the big things that I had from Darrell Waltrip's interview, from his interview with Bristol. Again, it was a very nice presentation. It was a very nice send off. Although of course he's going to close out this year through Sonoma and everything, and I wish him the very best on that. And I do mean that. But I do think that the interview that he had at Bristol in particular was very telling about the state of broadcast these days and where things have kind of gotten awry. And as I mentioned on social media last week, it's not just Darrell Waltrip. It's something much larger. It's an overall approach that's the issue. And some things have been lost in that approach that used to be used. And it's not just a simple matter of rose-tinted glasses and say, oh, well, everything was better 20 years ago. No, it wasn't. There's a lot of things that we have access to now, a lot of information we have access to now, but it's not being used to its fullest potential, and that's why it's not as good. But it can be there. It can be there, and I'm hopeful that I'm hopeful on the one hand that with Darrell Waltrip, he finds something like Dale Jr. has with like a podcast. I can see him totally doing that. I mean, he says he doesn't know what his plans are for next year. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a Darrell Waltrip podcast and he does a thing where he interviews with other drivers and he can talk about the old days and everything and all that. And I think that'd be a great listen. I hope he doesn't stop being involved in the sport. And I know he won't. He's gonna stay in the sport somehow. But in the broadcast booth, I don't think it's the right fit anymore because he's clearly a fan of Kyle Busch. He gushes about him constantly, and he is, I believe, lost sight of why a broadcast needs to be what it needs to be. And again, if you still aren't convinced on that, again, that's your opinion. I know there's people that are just absolute diehard Darrell Waltrip fans, but I saw a very clear difference. Watching Ken Squire's interview with Kyle Petty and the moderate professionalism, the very calm and measured manner, the depth of the knowledge, the awareness of purpose in a television broadcast. And he did radio too. So maybe that's why that transitioned over there easier versus Darrell Waltrip's view and his perception of certain limitations that are around now. Today isn't about limitations. We have all this information in the world. They have a whole computer digital booth in Charlotte that they can make do whatever they want. It's a blank canvas and they can do whatever they want with it. I just want them to do the very best with what they have. And I think that is the thing that needs to be taken from this whole experience this past week here. So the big points on that, again, I don't have any problem with the Jenna Fryer's article. I found it very professional. I thought she did a good job on it. I don't believe it was anything that was outwardly mocking of Darrell Waltrip. I don't think she was saying anything that a large number of people, maybe not a majority, but a large number of people were thinking and have been thinking for years, including Darrell himself, who was thinking about retiring from a couple of years ago. And I do feel that, when you're rooting for drivers in the booth, when you're outwardly doing it, I haven't watched the whole post race with the thing with Kyle Busch, but I can just imagine it that, it's all that stuff going on there. You want to see a good show and everything, but there's some professional distance. And part of that professional distance is being able to portray the broadcast, maybe not in the exact same way as a radio broadcast, but with a similar clarity of purpose, with a similar depth of understanding, with a similar passion to it. And that passion isn't just screaming over everybody and filling the air and just talking about nothing. You're actually commenting on what's happening in the race because you can see what's happening on the broadcast, but you can't see everything, especially when the camera is pulled in real tight and it's looking at you just like this. I mean, that doesn't work. And that's a whole other issue, but it all ties together that way. So that's my thoughts on the Darrell Waltrip thing. I don't want to beat that too much more than I already have, but I definitely wanted to make sure I get those points across on here. Let me look at Bob Hockers's page here again. I want to make sure everything is as it should be. Have we seen a call yet on the inspection results? I haven't seen one yet. I still see some old post here. You had an interview with Brad Keselowski on the grid. It's definitely one to check out here. 146,000. You're saying, okay, here we go. 18 minutes ago. How appropriate. 18 minutes ago, we do have a call. Post-race technical inspection is done per Bob Pockris. No issues. Kyle Busch is your winner. Hamlin and Truex cars both had one lug nut not safe or secure. So the 11 and the 19 with one lug nut not secure. Kyle Busch is your winner, and therefore Arc Almirola is your last place finisher today at Bristol. We still have not had a disqualification on the disqualification show since we have started this back at Daytona. Tell me your thoughts on where you think if we're going to get another, if it's going to happen this year. If we're going to, I mean, we certainly never hope for it to happen, but is this going to be a situation where we see another similarity with rules on there or not? So yes, but yeah, you're right, Anthony. Yeah. So this show ran a bit long today. I apologize for that. I hope you found it interesting and not too tedious. But I'm gonna go ahead and close it out through here. so I could finish up on the article on Almirola and get that up tonight. The John Jackson article for the Xfinity race will also be up, and you will be able to enjoy those both as well. Stay tuned this week. We're going to have the preview article for Richmond, and then we're going to get ready for the off weekend after that for spring break. Hope you all have a very happy and safe spring break, but I'm sure we're going to talk before then about the action in Richmond, and we'll see what happens there. So again, congratulations to Kyle Busch, Aric Almirola, your last place finisher on the Cup Series side, and John Jackson, your last place run on the Xfinity side. And thank you again for tuning in, and we will catch up next week. Well, not the same time. It's going to be a night race. That'll be a different experience altogether. And we'll do the same thing and see what happens. But thank you again for your support. LastCar.info, the website, patreon.com/LastCar on Brock for more information about last place finishers and teams that more or less finish there or around, or not just getting as much broadcast coverage as the others. Also, check out my YouTube channel. Just type in Brock Beard at the search bar, and also NASCAR Man History for the videos that I've narrated on racing history in recent years. So thank you again for your support, and we'll talk to you next week.